So here we are, after 6 years of waiting, multiple developers, countless delays, and enough drama to fill its own vampire soap opera, Vampire Masquerade Bloodlines 2 is finally releasing October 21st, and honestly, I went into this one with my expectations somewhere between casually optimistic and preparing for disappointment. The original Bloodlines from 2004 is one of the games that is legendary for all the right and the wrong reasons. It was buggy, it was janky, it was unfinished, but somehow managed to become this cult classic that people still mod and play 20 years later, which is amazing. So when Paradox announced the sequel back in 2019, the vampire community collectively held their breath. Now, before we sink our teeth into this one, let me set the stage here. This game has been through development hell and back. Originally being made by Heartsuit Labs, it got delayed from 2020 from 2021, and then indefinitely before the Chinese room took over in 23. That's the studio behind Dear Esther and Still Wakes the Deep. Not exactly known for RPGs, so yeah, there were some concerns, but after spending about 30 hours roaming the streets of Seattle as an elder vampire, I can tell you that Bloodlines 2 is fascinating, frustrating, but oddly compelling all at the same time. Let me start with what actually works here, because despite everything you might have heard already, there's some generally good stuff about this game. You play as Fire, an elden vampire who's been taking a dirt nap for about a century. You wake up in modern day Seattle without any memory of how you got there, with a mysterious mark on your hand that's blocking your powers, and the voice of another vampire riding around in your head named Fabian. The setup is pretty solid. You're not just some rookie vampire stumbling around trying to figure out which end of the fang goes where. You're actually an ancient predator trying to navigate a world that's moved on without you. Seattle itself is probably one of the game's strongest points. It's not massive, we're talking about 5 districts here, but it's dense and atmospheric in all the right ways. The Chinese room nailed this move. Snow falling consistently, neon lights reflect off wet streets, and there's this perfect mix of modern and urban decay with supernatural menace lurking in every alleyway. Jumping and running across rooftops at the vampire speed while the city sleeps below you feels incredible. The first time I scaled a building and I launched myself across the gap, I landed this perfect superhero crouch on the opposite roof, and I said to nobody in particular out loud, like, yeah, this is how being a vampire should feel like. It was giving me like Assassin's Creed with this vampire feel to it that was super heroic. The atmosphere really shines when you're stalking prey through the streets. You need blood to power your abilities. You can seduce people, scare them, or just straight up grab them and drag them into an alley. There's this constant tension between maintaining the masquerade, which is vampire society's #1 rule about not revealing yourself to humans, and needing to feed to be powerful. Breaking the masquerade too obviously, and you'll have bigger problems than just being hungry. Combat is where things get interesting, and when I mean interesting, I mean problematic as hell. The Chinese room went all in with first-person melee combat, which is already a tough sell for a lot of people, me included. I don't like first-person combat, but here's the thing, when it works really well. You feel like an apex predator tearing through enemies, punching people, flying across the room. You can grab someone mid-fight, drain them dry, and the finished animations are absolutely brutal. This thing, it has this raw satisfaction to the combat that I just wasn't expecting. The game gives you 3 main playstyles to work with. You got your strategic stalker for stealth players, you got action brawlers for people who just want to punch their way through Seattle, and then you got this narrative adventurer for folks who just wants to experience the story without being bogged down by combat. Boring. I primarily played as the action brawler because, let's be honest, if you're a century-old vampire, being calm becomes an option at some point, right? The dodge mechanic becomes a parry if you time it right against melee attacks, and pulling off perfect counter into a devastating combo feels genuinely satisfying and amazing. But there's a big but to this. The combat is also incredibly janky. At times, there's no lock-on system, which with the game with this much close quarter combat, it feels like a massive oversight. You'll be swinging at the air as enemies zip around you, or you'll knock someone back and they'll just kind of float there and defy the laws of physics. Enemy AI can be brain dead one moment and then just absolutely destroy you the next. I have fights where I felt unstoppable, just like an unstoppable force of nature, and then just 4 or 5 random street thugs would just come in there and just turn me into vampire paste because they all decided to attack at the same time. The telekinesis system is actually pretty clever though, since you're too bougie as an elder vampire to pick up weapons like a common mortal. You use telekinesis to grab guns from enemies or fire them, or pick up environmental objects to throw. It adds a layer to combat where you're constantly scanning for things to weaponize. Grabbing a propane tank and then launching at a group of enemies never gets old. Now let's talk about the clan system, because this is where longtime vampire fans might start to feel a little bit left down. You choose from 1 of 6 clans to start. You got the Bruja for the Brawlers, the Tremere for the Blood Magic, you got the Venture for the Mind Control, Anu Hakim for the Stealth, and after some initial controversy about them being locked behind DLC, you got the Terrador and the La Sombra are now in the base game too. Each clan comes with unique abilities that generally change how you approach combat. Playing as a Tremere and making enemies explode from the inside with blood magic feels completely different from going invisible as the La Sombra and picking enemies off one by one. But here's where things get weird. There's no clan weaknesses, which if you know anything about Vampire Masquerade, that's like having Superman without the kryptonite. Even stranger, you can eventually unlock abilities from other clans as you progress. By the end of the game, clan choices just basically determine what powers you start with and just add some flavor text to the conversations in the game. It's a streamlined approach that makes this game more accessible, but it loses a lot of what makes tabletop games feel special. For example, the Venture are supposed to be able to feed on specific types of blood, which would have added some interesting challenge to the feeding mechanics instead of just everyone munching on each other. The skill progression is another mixed bag. You'll unlock all of your clan's core abilities within the first 6 to 8 hours, and after that, everything else just feels like a side grade rather than an upgrade. You can find hidden blood echoes around the city to increase your health, but your basic punch does the same damage at hour 1 that it did at hour 30. For a game building itself as an action RPG, the RPG part feels pretty light. You're already a badass elder vampire from the start, so there's no real power progression curve to speak of. Now we need to talk about the elephant in the room, or should I say the voice in your head. Fabian the Malkavian detective living rent-free in your brain is supposed to be this Noir-style guide through modern Seattle. This idea is actually brilliant on paper. You've been asleep for 100 years, so having someone who knows the modern world whispering advice makes total sense. Plus you get to play him during flashback sequences, which actually should add variety to the gameplay. In practice, however, Fabian got on my damn nerve. He is exhausting. His section slows the game pace to a crawl. His Noir detective got old really fast. And worst of all, his special powers that should let you read minds or manipulate people are completely scripted. You can't use them creative or strategically. They're only work during specific story beats when the game tells you they can work. This section feels less like playing a mentally gifted vampire and more like watching a cutscene where you occasionally press a button. The dialogue system is functional but lifeless. Most conversations boil down to 3 options that usually lead to the same outcome with slightly different flavored text. Your clan choices can add some unique dialogue options here and there, but they rarely lead anywhere meaningful. I kept waiting for moments where a blood source fundamentally changed how a conversation played out, but mostly I just got different to do the same thing. It's a classic illusion of choice problem where the game wants you to feel like you're making a decision, but they don't actually want you to create branding content to support those decisions. The main story starts off strong though. The mystery of why you're in Seattle, who put that mark on your hand, and what the various vampire factions want from you sets up some generally intriguing questions. The court politics of vampire society are very well written, with different factions fighting for control of Seattle while trying to maintain the Masquerade in the face of the Second Inquisition. That's basically the Vatican's vampire hunting division for those of you who aren't deep in the vampire lore. Characters like Lou Graham, the vampire prince of Seattle, and the various faction leaders you meet are memorable and well voice acted. But man, does this story fumble the landing. Without spoiling anything, the last few hours felt rushed and it was super unsatisfying. The plot threads just dropped, character arcs went nowhere, there's multiple endings that basically just pick your favorite faction and you're watching a slightly different cutscene that's all the more the same. After 30 hours of build these elaborate vampire politics and personal vendettas, the resolution just feels ripped out of the last chapters and replaced them with the Wikipedia summary. It's generally one of the most unsatisfying endings I've ever experienced in an RPG, and that's really saying something because there's been a lot of bad ones throughout the years. Of course, they're probably the game's weakest element. They're repetitive, they're uninspired. They were added just like pad runtime. Go here, kill these guys, fetch this item, feed on this specific person, rinse, wash, and repeat. The game does this thing where after every few missions, a new day starts and all the side quests refresh, but they're basically the same handful of side quests with different types, slightly different window dressing, and after the second round of these, I started ignoring them completely just because the reward just weren't worth the time. What makes this more frustrating is that some of the NPCs that give you these quests are genuinely interesting characters with great voice acting and fun personalities. There's this Nosferatu information broker who's delightfully creepy and a thin blood vampire running a bar who has some great dialogue, but the actual missions they give you are so bland that it felt like a waste of potential. Give me interesting politics to navigate, not another fetch quest system disguised as supernatural intrigue. Again, the parkour felt like Assassin's Creed, but so did the same boring quest item search here, search there, quest side missions that they give you. It was the same as well. Technically, the game is a mixed bag leaning towards problematic. I played on a PC with some pretty high specs, and I still experience regular stuttering, especially moving through the open world. That's that classic Unreal Engine 5 stutter that plagues so many games nowadays. Enemies would get stuck in geometry and float in the air after being knocked back, or just stand there while I punched them to death. During one boss fight, the boss got stuck in the wall and I had to reload to the checkpoint. These aren't game-breaking bugs most of the time, but they were constant enough to really piss me off and be annoying. The enemy variety is also pretty lacking. You'll fight the same handful of enemy types around the entire game. Random thugs, vampire hunters, other vampires, and that's basically it. By hour 15, you've seen everything the game has to throw at you combat-wise, and you still have another 15 hours to go. Even the boss fights, which admittedly are some of the game's highlights with multiple phases and unique mechanics, you can't shake the feeling that you're fighting bigger enemies with just bigger health bars. But you know what? Despite all of these issues, and admittedly there are a lot, I still find myself oddly compelled to keep playing. There's just something about the game's atmosphere and setting that kept pulling me back in. Maybe it's the way the snow falls on empty Seattle streets at 3 a.m. Maybe it's the thrill of prey through dark alleys and maintaining the masquerade by a small thread. Or maybe it's just that we get so few proper vampire games that I'm willing to overlook a lot of jank for the chance to play a century-old vampire predator navigating modern nights. The game also does some generally interesting things with vampire lore. The way it presents different clans, their philosophies, and their place in vampire society shows real respect for the source material, even if the mechanics are streamlined. Conversations about what it means to be an immortal predator in a modern world, the price of power, whether vampires can truly coexist with humans, touch on themes that most games don't even attempt. When a venture elder is explaining how they manipulated Seattle's economy for decades while a anarch argues for tearing down the whole system, you can feel the weight of centuries of vampire politics here. Playing this game reminded me why I love the original Bloodlines despite its massive flaws. There's ambition here, a willingness to be weird and dark and different that you don't really see that much in gaming anymore. And yes, it's janky as hell, yes the combat is super frustrating, and yes the story completely falls apart at the end, that was crazy. But it's also the only game where I can be a 400-year-old vampire blood sorcerer trying to navigate both the modern technology and ancient vampire politics while a Nordish detective whispers commentary. The feeding mechanics, while simplified from what they could have been, still create some interesting moments here. There's something darkly satisfying about scanning a crowd with your vampire senses and then identifying the person with the blood type you need for a specific ability upgrade, and then figuring out how to isolate them without breaking the Masquerade. Do you seduce them? Do you scare them into running into an alley? Or do you just wait until they're alone? There's these little predatory puzzles are when the game is at. Personally, I also appreciated that the game doesn't shy away from the fact that you're playing a monster. You're not a vampire with a heart of gold or a brooding anti-hero. You're a predator who sees humans, and the game doesn't try to make you feel good about it. The casual way your character discusses human casualties or the indifference they show towards moral concerns reinforces that you're playing something inhuman. It's refreshing in the landscape of games that always want you to be a hero. The clan abilities, even with their simpler design, do provide some different tactical options. Playing as a Lasombra and using shadow tentacles to grab enemies and pull them into your grasp feels fundamentally different from playing as a Tremere and keeping your distance while you rain down blood projectiles on enemies. The game might not have full depth, full RPG, but there's enough variety to support multiple playthroughs if you're really into the settings. Would I recommend Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 at full price? Honestly, probably not, unless you're a massive fan of the franchise or just into vampire games in general, which I think most people are who are playing this, but this is still a $40 to $50 at best, and even then you need to go in with the right expectations. This is not a deep RPG sequel that the original fans have been waiting 20 years for. It's a streamlined combat-focused RPG game with light RPG elements set in the world of darkness. But if you grab it on sale, if you're curious about vampire fiction, if you have a tolerance for janky but atmospheric games, there's something here worth experiencing. It's flawed, it's frustrating, and it's occasionally broken, but there's still this unique atmosphere and unlike anything else releasing in modern gaming. In a world of safe, focus testing, designed by a committee of games, Bloodline 2 feels like it was made by people who wanted to make a vampire game, even though they didn't always nail the execution the best. The real tragedy of Bloodlines 2 is that you can see a great game buried by all these problems. With another year of development, better technical polish, and more enemy variety, and an ending that actually pays off the set-off, this could have been something special. Instead, we got a game destined to follow in its predecessor footsteps as a flaw buff, fascinating curiosity that a small group of dedicated fans will probably still be talking about for years from now. So if you're thinking about picking this up, ask yourself this. Can you enjoy a game that's more interesting than it is good? Can you appreciate ambition even when it falls short? Can you find fun in janky combat and predictable AI atmosphere if it's dripping with style? If you answered yes to most of those questions, then maybe give Bloodlines 2 a shot when it goes on sale. If you're looking for a polished, smooth AAA experience, this absolutely isn't the game. For me personally, despite all my complaints, I'm glad that I played it. It reminded me that games can still be weird and rough around the edges and trying to be something different. It's not the Bloodlines sequel that I wanted, but in its own messy way, it might be one that we deserve. A game that is conflicted and contradictory as the vampires it portrays. Beautiful, ugly, compelling, and frustrating, and ambition and underdeveloped all at the same time. The modding community is already talking about what they can do to fix and improve just like they did with the original. Maybe in some years with some patches and some mods, Bloodlines 2 will realize more of its potential. Maybe it'll remain this fascinating failure that we'll still be discussing from a decade from now. Either way, it's definitely a game that exists, and in this current gaming landscape, being memorable might be worth more than being good. And before I let you go, just a quick heads up that Paradox has already announced 2 story DLCs coming in 2026, Loose Cannon in Q2, and The Flower and the Flame in Q3. Whether these will add meaningful content or just be more of the same remains to be seen, but if you're on the fence, maybe just wait for the complete edition down the road. Alright, that's gonna do it for this review. If you enjoyed this video and want more honest takes on games, make sure to hit that subscribe and ring that notification bell. We're streaming games like this and more over on Twitch, so come hang out with me. Link is in the description below. We got a great community that's building over there, and I'd love to see you in the chat roasting my terrible combat skills in games like this. But until next time, keep gaming, stay critical, and remember, the most interesting games are the ones that are broken. Stay alpha.